Most people in Western countries, in the United States, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, et cetera, most people who lived in those countries 2 years ago got the COVID vax. That's just a fact. And maybe because of that fact, very few people want to talk about what that was, not just what the vax itself was and what it may do to the human body and the human brain. Those are worthy conversations, important conversations, necessary conversations, ignored conversations. But the bigger conversation is, why were governments across the West pulling out all stops to force people to take this compound that they called a vaccine? What was this? And what do we learn about the motives and the aims of those governments by their behavior around the vax? What do we learn? Because those countries, all of them, revealed that they were not in fact democracies. They were not free countries at all. They were something very different. And if you go back and you watch the tape and you watch how Western leaders talked about the COVID vaccine, about people who didn't want to get vaccinated, you learned a lot about them. In fact, it's not your body or choice in their view. It's their body and their choice. And in no country was this clearer maybe than Canada, where the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, not only told people to get this drug, but attacked anyone who wouldn't as illegitimate, as evil, as a fifth column within the borders of Canada seeking to overthrow the democracy of Canada. In case you've forgotten, here he is.
For the vast majority of people, the rules are very simple. To travel, you've got to be vaccinated. When people see that we're in lockdowns or serious public health restrictions right now, because the risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people, people get angry. Proof of vaccination will be required by no later than the end of this month for all federal employees. And by mid-November, enforcement measures in place will make sure that everyone is vaccinated.
If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train besides vaccinated people and put them at risk.
Wait a second. If you don't take this untested drug, you can't travel within your own country? You are inherently unclean, and clean, obedient people shouldn't be forced to sit next to you? That's like Nazi stuff, right? I mean, that's what we read about when we read about the darkness descending on Germany in the 1930s. That's why we aren't for fascism, because we're not for that. That's why we're free and they were enslaved. And yet all of a sudden, our leaders, and particularly that leader, were just saying it out loud. You must do this, or else you have no rights at all. Amazing. And of course, most people in Canada, as most people in the United States, went along with it, but some didn't. And famously, a group of truckers in Canada decided to form what they called a freedom convoy, drive to Ottawa to protest this. And in response, the Prime Minister of that country invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in the history of Canada. And this gave the police, among other powers, the power to freeze your bank account, to shut down your Bitcoin exchange. So it turns out we spent like 80 years talking about dictators and fascists, but when they emerged in our own societies, we didn't even notice. But a few people did notice, and one of them is a man called Kyle Kemper. He's a Canadian. He happens to be the half-brother of Justin Trudeau, and it may or may not be personal, but he wound up on exactly the other side of this question of medical freedom and bodily autonomy. And so we thought it'd be interesting to talk to him about what we're watching, not just in his country of birth, Canada, but around the world. And he joins us now. Kyle, thanks so much for coming on.
Tucker, it's a real pleasure to be on.
So I do think, I mean, this just happened a couple of years ago, so it's hard to know when you're in the middle of something what's really significant and what isn't. But 2 years out, it does seem like this question of whether you have the right to decide what drugs go into your body. This is kind of maybe the central right that we have as free people. How do you read what happened in Canada over the vax? Like, what did that mean?
Oh, I mean, I think all over the world there were people who were very distrustful of it, and I think we've been warned. There's been many warning signs that there would be a mass injection campaign coming at some point, and then with, you know,
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So you believed before COVID even got here that the government of your country, my country, of all of our countries, might force us to take an injection of something.
I mean, that's what many people were kind of warning about. I think Aaron Russo many moons ago was suggesting that. And
did you take that seriously? at the time?
When you keep hearing, that this warning that this might come down at some point, and then you see with the COVID-19 scenario, everyone painting fear around the virus, and hope around the vaccine. Like that just, your spidey sense kind of goes up. The hairs stand up on your arms, and you think, something's amiss here. And then when it becomes, okay, everybody must do this for the greater good, and you see all of a sudden, public officials like my brother out there being effectively salesmen for the pharmaceutical industry, otherwise promoting a product that you can't advertise, and yet you have the schools, you have it being pushed across all of society in such incredible levels that there was a lot of people who were like you and I, suspicious of it. And personally, I have 5 children and a 6th on the way, and I'm not willing to expose myself to something that could be very dangerous. There's a difference between fear and danger. And it's like, if you operate in a land of worrying about all the things that scare you, that's one thing. To be aware and conscious of clear and present dangers and to be reactive to that is important. And that's, what I chose to do. And many of us have chosen to.
Me too. I had pretty much the same reaction. My spidey senses went off. I'm not taking that. I mean, my family's not doing that. But I didn't really have a framework for understanding it. I mean, from my perspective, I think I was watching the wrong media or something. It came kind of out of the blue. And all of a sudden you see these governments acting, in authoritarian, totalitarian ways. And I'm still shocked when I think about it. You seem less shocked.
I was always worried that what might happen, with when Justin was in power, like what kind of scenario could happen if another, a 9/11 type massive global scenario were to unfold. Sure enough, we see the.
Why were you worried about that?
Because what type of actions, would come out of it? Just like in the wake of 9/11, we saw all the nations of the world kind of come together underneath, this anti-terror plan and this war on terror. Now we have, the war on COVID.
It's just, again, it's interesting to talk to someone who was a little more enlightened a little earlier than I was. Because I saw your brother and I thought, well, he's a liberal. You know what I mean? Like in a true probably smokes a lot of weed and has, dreams about world peace or something. That's the opposite of what this turned out to be. How did you know that?
Well, first, I loved my brother, Justin.
Of course.
Through and through. And, I don't think he's never smoked that much weed. Right? He was not really into that. That was not his thing. He's pretty on point. But I will, add to it that he liked to be he likes the attention, and he likes to be the leader of, of the show. And when the opportunity for him to be, follow in his father's footsteps and be, the Prime Minister of Canada, because, if you're growing up as a child and you see, your father as the Prime Minister and having access to all of the lights, the events, the interactivities,
the trappings, we say.
Trappings, yeah. You kind of want that too. And I think, I don't know what exactly took place, but at some point it was like, it was either Justin was kind of identified as someone who would make a great Prime Minister and was, helped in that journey. And, quite frankly, Justin he's an amazing person, and he was able to connect with so many people.
Yes.
And very lovable. But again, once this COVID and the vaccine thing took place, and his words that he was using, which I don't know were really coming from his heart or whether they're coming from, the teleprompter, what was really being.
But it sounds like you saw in him, despite your love for him and your acknowledgement that he's talented, which he obviously is, he became Prime Minister, you saw in him the potential for the abuse of power.
I mean, I don't think he's abusing power. I think power is just in general being abused.
Yep.
Just like, we've seen it, whether it's Justin or it was, Boris Johnson,
right,
or Jacinda Ardern or Joe Biden.
Couldn't agree more. Power tends to be abused by its nature.
And centralized systems over time, the further centralized they get, the more secretive and corrupt they become as well.
Amen. Now you're speaking my language, Kyle. I totally agree with you. So when the vax thing happened and your brother starts saying things like anyone who hasn't taken it is dirty and you should have a right not to be physically near a dirty, unvaccinated person, you say that was stuff that not from his heart, but from the teleprompter. Who do you think was putting it on the teleprompter?
Well, or it's like, as Matthias Desmond said, like this mass formation psychosis, when you have like everybody around him saying all this, like, it's like, what are his inputs? Like with Plato's cave, like if everybody's always around you telling you how the world is, that's going to impact your worldview versus ourselves being open to having much more access to open information and, actually listening to it. Like there's a point I really believe, like there's good intentions, but when counter information is presented, it's like you don't want to hear it, and it threatens the worldview. It's like, just give me the blue pill. I'll just keep taking.
Totally right.
Pill. Like, no, don't want to know, because I know, like, is if you recognize that there is, there's shadows and there are nefarious activities, and there's, that some of these warnings might have some credence and demand further investigation and justice, then can be an uncomfortable position to put yourself in. So
what and thank you for mentioning Matthias Desmat, wrote one of the great books of the last 100 years, in my opinion.
Well, and in that point, what he said about, you can catalyze a group to really, hate another group.
Oh, yes.
And, and Charles Eisenstein wrote an excellent article called Mob Morality and the Unvaxxed, in which he made the case that, this group is being like relentlessly attacked. And, we saw a Toronto Star in Canada write a full like front page article saying, let them die. It was just so hostile towards, those of us who said, no, you know what? I'm not interested. I'm not going to do this. You don't have.
And they wished your death on you for that.
And even Joe Biden said it's going to be, what did he say? A winter of death?
Yes.
Or like something ridiculous along those lines. Like the absurd pressure to take this experimental injection. Like I got suspended off Twitter for calling it a fake vaccine. Because, Mike, does it stop transmission? Does it prevent infection? Like, no. How you can call it a vaccine?
Yeah. So what did that mean for you? Well, you probably got suspended because you're Justin Trudeau's brother too. So you could.
It was a reply to one of his boasting tweets about, how terrific it is that we've stuck 70 million people in the arm.
What did that mean for you and your family? So you've got a 6th child away, you got a huge family. You're from Canada. Mm-hmm. Could you go back like during the COVID lockdowns?
In the beginning, it was very difficult. And then there was this whole essential worker kind of scenario. The border was just a nightmare. And that's why I ended up getting this RV that's now a super awesome Kennedy bus. I drove around America, drove from California up to Canada because, the airports were unconscious. And when you're dealing with agents in an airport and you've got your family and you have mixed nationalities within the family, there's a chance you could, have a bad interaction and your family's split up there and all of a sudden it's apart. So, just taking the pragmatic, intelligent approach, in my opinion, I got an RV and I drove across the country. And that also was super eye-opening because driving across America in, what was that, June of 2020?
Yeah.
Was really interesting. California was very scared. We got to Texas. I was in the spring with like 3,000 people. It was amazing. It was like everything was fine. Everything was great. And then as we proceeded to get closer to Ottawa, it's like, the level of fear, you could just feel it. And then once you got into Canada, oh my God, it was you're there 14 days, pure isolation between coming in there. And like, you know, and if you were in contact with other people in 14 days, you could face up to 6 months in jail. And I think it was a $500,000 fine was they're threatening you with. It's just insane what, you know, the levels. And then when challenged on these topics, and this is what the truckers did a lot of, was like, can we talk about some of these general assumptions and these facts that you're stating behind why we're doing this? They're met with, hostility for asking simple questions.
Well, those questions were racist, as I remember, weren't they?
I would not say that. I think they're fair questions that desire honest interactivity. But this is the challenge about a myth. It's like when everything is based on a myth or based on a lie or false or a deceptive narrative, you can't debate. Instead, you must attack and enrage and censor and, you know, smear.
Yeah.
This was like the whole conspiracy theory. Like, no, it's just conspiracy theory. Don't talk about that. I mean, you played a part in that like way back in the day as well. Just dismissing.
Oh, I used to dismiss a lot of things as conspiracy theories.
I mean, remember, I believe you said it was blasphemous to question 9/11.
I famously said that to Alex Jones's producers. And I think I said it for the same, it was in 2012. And I think I said it for the same reason that Matthias Desmet in your description described, which is to admit that the things you thought were true might not be true or more complicated than you thought they were, kind of challenges your assumption about everything. And that's scary. And I just didn't want that. And then, you know, by the time 2015 rolled around, it was like absolutely impossible to deny that a lot of this was fake.
And everybody can also change too, like based on information. Like at some point, you know, anybody can forgive themselves can forgive themselves and apologize to themselves for being deceived or, you know, having, you know, gone down a wrong path. Like you can realize that something, you know, actions that you've taken, you know, were misplaced and, you know, move forward in intention and integrity.
Of course. And by the way, you can't have integrity if you don't do that.
Right.
You can't live with a lie. You have to give it up by repenting. So how were you treated in Canada? How have you been treated in Canada since you're making a case that's, you know, diametrically opposed to that of your brother?
Well, he referenced like the truckers as like a small fringe minority. And I'll counter that. I actually believe the Liberals and the current government really represent a small fringe.
I think that's right.
And I think the majority of Canadians are frustrated. They're wondering why it's costing $45 for a platter of vegetables at the store. I feel like they're frustrated around, you know, what took place, how 2 years of their lives were surrounded within so much fear and how everybody was cut off. And, you know, people I know, like personally, some like, you know, when I spoke up during the trucker thing and was like, you know, was really inspired by them, it was like 99-1 positive messages, you know, to negative messages. It's been overwhelmingly positive, you know, the reaction and the sentiment. And it just seems like, you know, reality or like, you know, the primary interactions that I'm seeing with people versus like, you know, the Matrix reality, you know, what you see on television are very different. And in talking to some of my friends in Ottawa, like, you know, I asked them, like, did you go down to Parliament Hill and engage? Because it seemed like, you know, it seemed like it was like a demonstration, but it also seemed like it was a party. It seemed like for 17 days, Burning Man came to Ottawa.
Yeah.
It was freezing.
In January,
freezing man. And crime was down, vibes were high, people were looking out for each other. There was communal effort, they're participating, there was so much gifting, it was radically inclusive. Like all the principles were on display. But, you know, to those who didn't venture in there, if they just watched the news, it was, no, this is like, you know, this is right.
Nazi conclave.
Nazis there. And they flew a Nazi flag and oh my God, it's the Nazis. And that's like, you know, I feel like that flag was basically, what was the the Reichstag,
Yeah.
all over again.
Of course.
Micro example
Of course.
of that planted. So there was this opportunity to engage with these million people and the truckers, but more than the truckers too, because the truckers represented the heart of it. But then Canadians came out. I talked to my friend Sonny. He went to go to an overpass, and he had been isolated for over a year, with his family, living in this bubble. And when questioning things, and then he went out to see the overpass and see all the truckers. There were hundreds of people at this overpass. And just the energy of all those people was really inspiring. And then he ended up going to Ottawa and being like, this is incredible. So, the reality of what took place on the ground there, if you went out and visited and saw it with your primary your eyes versus what the media was painting it as, were very different. And unfortunately, because it's based on a myth, the government just chose to enrage versus engage. And, and then following it, they enacted the War Measures Act, rebranded the Emergencies Act, to censor people's bank accounts. Individual personalities within the movement were indefinitely detained. They confiscated, used legal tactics to lock up a lot of the donation funds that were going towards supporting the demonstration. Give, Send, Go, the faith-based crowdfunding platform, got hacked by some devilish characters, and then they released all the information of the donors to the public. And our valiant mainstream media in Canada were first to go through and analyze who all the people that donated were and start doxing people, that guy works in the prime, works on Parliament Hill, and people were getting fired as a result of it. And for me, what was really kind of challenging out of this was, if you bring 1 million people to Ottawa in the heart of winter for this truly exceptional gathering with a purpose, and they used the horns, and by the end, the horns, they were trying to work with the city too, and they were trying to, they wanted to respect. They didn't want to be, real assholes to everybody in the city. And the beginning of, you don't know exactly. It's
right.
Kind of coming together. But the result of, the security guards come into the zone and clear everybody out, and they got those terrible images of that ridiculous horse trampling of the old lady, and a bunch of brutality, and those were some of the images that really stuck, because they didn't want the bouncy castle images to be what this thing was remembered. People cleared out peacefully, and it was bouncy castles and hot tubs and street hockey and fireworks and dance parties and press conferences and experts gathering together and gifting and communal activity. That's one thing. So instead, they brought in the security guards, and they had a really ugly kind of house cleaning to it, and then they punily went after everybody. So as Canadians, if you can't change or have a voice through a massive demonstration like that, what methods do you have towards influencing or shifting radical policy?
Yeah. Okay. So that now we're getting to the point, which is, if you take away peaceful democratic means of protest and change, you leave people with only ugly options.
Well, or we're now, when you get pushed, it's what are we going to do? And I feel like, the world is full of amazing innovators. And when you see this, it's okay, protests aren't going to work. What else can we do? Year's 2024, we have unbelievable technologies that we've never had before, like Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain and distributed ledger technology, internet. If you look at the beginning, the Westminster system of governance, the U.S. system of governance, was invented in a time when you needed representatives from specific regions to go to Washington to represent that. You didn't have the telegraph. You didn't have internet. You didn't have communications abilities. So you needed a representative to go on behalf of your district, your area, your state, whatever, to go represent the interest. Well, we're still using that system 250 years later, how many years later we are now, but the conditions have changed. We have FaceTime. We can talk directly to somebody on the other side of the planet in high definition. maybe we should start looking at our governance systems
Yes.
and how we can upgrade those. Like Russell Brand is always talking about how do we, decentralize and allow people to have a little bit more input. In Switzerland, it's a form of direct democracy. If you, as a citizen, have an issue with something, you go get 100,000 signatures, and then the entire country will vote on it.
Yes.
And they'll be presented with a booklet that says why you should vote for this referendum, and then the government's official position why you shouldn't vote for this. And everybody gets this booklet. So it's a very informed.
We have multiple elections every year in Switzerland.
I think they have like 3 or 4.
Yes. So I haven't asked you half an hour in about your contact with your brother. So you have not just views that are different from him, but like you've thought them through. You believe them for a reason. You probably have something to add. It sounds like you do. I think you do. Did you call him at any point?
I did. In the very beginning, I mean, I wanted to help out. My family's got restaurants. We got like the Clock Tower brew pubs in Ottawa. And, I thought, well, what can we do? Can we do some food service? How can we help the community towards in this, this dangerous time? I wasn't really met with too much. Obviously he himself, I think, was also taking in so much different information. And I, wanted to help. I remember a good friend reached out with a mushroom solution that was helping the cytokine storm, and sent that his way, and never got any kind of answers to it. Just didn't seem like, he was really looking for too much help. And then, like, once the vaccine agenda became really clear, that's when I was just like, hold on here. I remember, Mickey Willis put out Plandemic 1 with Judy Mikovits, but then he put out Plandemic 2, Indoctrination, which really detailed, the Event 201 scenario, where they basically role played how a global coronavirus pandemic should be handled by the corporatocracy in conjunction with government and media. And, so they role played the whole thing 2 months before, or 3 months before it all went live. So I was very it's kind of skeptical once I started learning all that information. And I could just see that, Justin, it wasn't, going to be there. And the opportunity for open discourse about this, I don't think he wasn't really interested in my points of view on these topics.
Was he angry at you for expressing yours?
I don't know. I mean, I hopefully in his heart of heart, he's proud of being open and honest and speaking your truth.
Yes.
I think this is critical. I think, this is the path forward. And it's also big admitting, when you're wrong.
That's the acid test right there. Can you admit when you were wrong?
Can you admit when you're wrong?
That's right.
It's like, and apologizing, but also it's like with our children. It's like, they'll say I'm sorry, but they don't necessarily know why they're sorry sometimes. Like if they hit, and I'm sorry for hitting you. That's what, or for doing this, but explaining to really understand what the problem was. And there's this kind of, this healing modality that needs to be embraced going forward. Like, are you familiar with the Hawaiian healing phrase, Ho'oponopono?
No.
Oh, it's beautiful. So it's a Hawaiian healing prayer that's comprised of 4 lines. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm grateful or thankful, and I love you. And you can say these 4 lines to yourself first, and apologize to yourself for those things that you did. Find place to forgive yourself for the things that you did. Be grateful and thankful to yourself, and also love yourself, really critical. But then you can also use this with other people. So I say this to my mother, because I know, what I was doing was hurting, was causing energy. So, and I say this to Justin too, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for any harm that I've caused, or if my words have negatively impacted your life. Please forgive me. I'm just trying to speak my truth and do what I think is right. Know that I love you, and I know that I'm thankful and grateful for everything, all the lessons, all the learnings, all the interactions, and that I love you, in my heart of hearts. And this Ho'oponopono message is something that I think we can take out there, and you can really heal a lot. And we live in a very divided civilization right now, more than just a country. Like in America, it's very divided. And this is one of Bobby's messages. Like, how do we heal the divide? How do we bring people together? Because we've been so polarized, and it's easy to, and I feel like it's by design. It's divide and conquer.
Of
You
course.
get people just like, how many different identity buckets can you get them in? And then when they're all fighting each other, it's like, it's easy to control. Versus like if we can actually heal and start working together and having open, honest discourse and respecting the differences of opinion that we all might have and share. But it's imperative that we're able to have open, honest discussion without being able to, retreat or censor or attack or smear or guilt by association or use single words like conspiracy theory to just dismiss very valid points that require investigation.
Right. I mean, you have to be honest enough to assess things on their own terms. Even if it's something you don't want to hear, the first question you have to ask, it's your moral obligation to ask, is it true? Is it true? You say to me, you're a bad driver. Well, I don't want to be a bad driver, but I have to ask myself, like, am I a bad driver? Right?
Right.
Yeah, right. You have to be honest. So you mentioned apologizing to your mom, who I should say for people who aren't Canadian is like a very famous person in Canada, of course. Margaret Trudeau, famous.
Amazing. Love you, mama.
What's her view of all this stuff? Got two sons on different sides.
I think, she's very proud of Justin and all that he's done. So, and I think I've always been, a little bit on the outside, let's say maybe the black sheep of the family a little bit with, the questions and the topics of discussions and the debates that I would like to engage in.
Like about what?
About many different things. About you had Ron Paul on here the other day. Like a lot of the lessons of the good doctor, like, the Federal Reserve, looking at that, looking at blowback, looking at foreign policy engagement. Like right now, Canada, Justin has said repeatedly, we're in this till the end, until victory. It's like, come on. What does that look like? How can we do that?
What does that even mean?
What exactly? It never ends. Like, what is the condition? Why aren't we until the victory? How about peace? How about diplomacy? How, like, the war, like pushing for war? Very, very dangerous, especially with our neighbors. Like Russia is a neighbor to Canada, just right there.
Yeah.
On the side. It's like, why we don't want to, what's the point of this?
Do you know the answer? I don't know the answer. What do you think the answer is? What is the point?
Well, I think it's a global proxy war for the corporatocracy to further transfer wealth from sovereign individuals into the coffers of the global corporation.
I think that's a good guess.
I mean, it's like Henry Perkins, like, he wrote the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It kind of shows, like, when we're giving $80 million or $80 billion in US dollars or whatever the number is to Ukraine, like, you think that money is like a pallet that's going to Ukraine? Like, no, it's there. Here's money for you to spend on our things.
So, you've made reference to prayer, and you've sort of revealed a worldview that is spiritual on some level. Canada seems very aggressively hostile to Christianity, for example, and spirituality. And that seems like a new thing. All these church burnings, for example, take place across your country. Some government officials, including your brother, seem to not have a problem with that. Like, what's your view of the role of spirituality in what's happening right now?
Well, there are a lot of pastors too, who stood up.
Yes.
And went to jail, and and who were subjugated and punished.
So if you're cheering church burnings and throwing pastors in jail, like, what side are you on?
What do you think?
I think you're on Satan's team, honestly. That's what I actually think, since you asked.
Well, it feels like there's some dark energies out there. There's like, I liken it to, like, it just seemed like there was a negative cloud taking in Canada, a bad energy, bad juju going on. Like when my wife Brittany and I were in Canada in 2020, she was pregnant. She got chased out of a grocery store.
Why?
Not wearing a mask. She was super pregnant, and we're defiant around all of that stuff. I was just not having it. And but for people to get to that level of animosity and hate towards someone for not kind of complying. It's really scary that it got to that state. And
Chasing a pregnant lady out of a grocery store?
chasing a pregnant lady out of a grocery store, triggering a miscarriage.
That's just absolutely beyond.
Oh, it's horrible.
So did you grow up in Ottawa?
I did.
So it really is your country, and I can tell by the way you
I
say
grew up
the
in
word
Ottawa.
out.
I've been all over Canada. I've been all around. Canadians far and wide are amazing people.
I agree with that.
Beautiful country, just like America. I mean, I've been so blessed to be all over America, and and for the last 8 months, I've been driving my Kennedy bus all over America too, which has been just an absolutely unbelievable experience. And, really meeting people where they're at. And I'll just say, and I've been all over the world too, and people everywhere are generally good. And it's like, there's good, beautiful hearts all over. There's bad people out there. There's some people that seek to deceive and cause chaos and might quite frankly be evil. But, I just have to do the best I can. And lead with an open heart and speak truth, and again, do the best you can. Be impeccable with your words. Don't make assumptions. Don't take things personally, and always do your best for agreements.
Amen. So the reason I asked you, just to confirm that you grew up in Canada, and then you get to 30 years later, your pregnant wife is being chased out of a grocery store. How did that happen? How did we? Because it didn't just. It came to a head during COVID and the trucker protest, but these things build over years. Did you see it coming? Did you know that the country was changing from a free place to a totalitarian place or a mob rules place?
There's definitely warning signs that these are going. My trust in the media, especially the Canadian media, we know the American media, being especially yourself, but the Canadian media is kind of a special type of hypnotic, deceptive. There isn't so much a real left right. It's kind of all just the same melange of here's what you believe, what you should think, and a lot of what should be objective reporting is presented with careful subjectivity.
It sort of marinates in propaganda. I remember seeing Hockey Night in Canada, a broadcast of it, and I was really struck, not just by the high level of play on the ice, but by the propaganda slogans everywhere around the rink that had nothing to do with selling anything. It was selling ideas about Canada, and I thought, wow, that's 1984 stuff.
And then look, when the COVID scenario took place too, it's you don't shut down the hockey,
right.
You don't shut down the gladiator sports. You need to keep people still doing that. So they just enacted the bubbles, and then they spin in all of a sudden the propaganda influence starts getting through and through into the sport, which is already there, but it becomes a little bit more in your face. And people aren't there's no fans in the stadiums here. It was but they kept playing, so that people could still have their sport and still have their entertainment there.
How did you wind up so different from your brother?
I learned a lot from Justin. I learned a lot from my brother Sash. I learned a lot from my late brother Michelle. I learned a lot from my father and from my mother and from my friends, and through experiences and through travels and through a very varied work history, and saying yes to things and opportunities, and just getting out there and experiencing all sorts of different things and keeping kind of an open mind. That's how I've gotten to the point where I am right now.
Huh. Can you name a certain set of experiences that made you so different?
Being involved with the Ron Paul stuff back in the day, listening to that, to the crypto industry and participating, which was in the beginning, which was a lot of like the libertarians, coming together, looking at, how do we solve for the Federal Reserve? How do we solve for decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash, which
Yes.
was Satoshi Nakamoto's vision. And then, just being immersed within that group of people was, very enlightening and very educational. And then like there was a certain point in like, 2015, 2016 that like a lot of the Burning Man kind of community started getting really into this space too. So, and there was like cross-pollination of information, and, a lot of the principles out of that were very, eye-opening as well. And, and I've spent a lot of time in California as well. And coming from Ottawa, which is, I'd say it's a conservative city. It's a government town, but it's a conservative town. Like, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator there, and as a creative, a lot of times, the first reaction is to say no to an idea. No, that's not going to work because of this, that, the other. But you go to California and like in being in these very innovative kind of environments, and the action is yes, like here's how we can do it. And it's like the kind of the American spirit, right? It's like, yes, we can. Let's build, let's create. And let's challenge and not just believe that you can't do something because, it might not work. It's like, you got to open yourself up to some vulnerability and try, because you're never going to succeed if you don't try. So at least try. It's like Bobby, he's freaking doing it. Going for the presidency. You show so much courage doing that. I'm behind you as well. Let's try this. We don't know what's going to happen. People will tell you they know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
That's true.
So why not give it your best? And it's like, and recognize that if you don't like the status, it's like in Switzerland. You don't like that law? Guess what? Get up, go out, get 100,000 signatures, and then everybody votes on it.
Is there any chance that happens in Canada?
There's no recourse. And this was one of the issues out of the trucker thing is, what can you do? Can you have a referendum? To do a referendum, and many people looked into it, you need a support of a sitting MP. And many of them aren't kind of willing to do that. So there's no like direct ability to, participate. And Justin, said, if you want to make a difference, if you don't like these policies, well, get out and vote. Get out and vote. And that's how you can show it. It's like, well, going out every 4 years or 5 years in the case of Canada, or 2, I don't know, it kind of switches up all the time. But going out and making one mark on a piece of paper and declaring that democracy, I just think that's a little bit short-sighted. It's not really civic engagement.
Could you ever imagine moving back there?
Yeah. I think Canada can win a Stanley Cup at one point too. Just need to fix the tax system.
Would that be an inducement to move back?
The tax system?
No, the Stanley Cup.
No, I think if the tax system were fixed, that would be, a great inducement for many people to move back to Canada.
Yeah.
The current system encourages successful people to leave, to offshore their money. It's not a culture of celebrating achievement and value creation.
No, it's a culture of crushing the different.
Yeah, and taxing, and and rules, and more laws, regulations, bylaw, provincial, federal. Just keep on adding. And there's a challenge in repealing these or cleaning it up. So I feel like we're at the point where what can you do? And like I mentioned before, the systems have changed. So I think it's time, for an open conversation about how things can change. And, like I said, Pierre Poilievre came to this conference that I held in Ottawa and talked about Switzerland and how referendums happen there and how blockchain could be able to use that. Well, I would love to see him, expand more on that and to explore in Canada how we can have a more involved population when it comes to being integrated in decisions, because the way the party system works is like they've got the whip. That word goes back a ways. They use their whip, and all people within the party just have to vote according to, you know, the party's dictate, and that doesn't represent the people. Like, you know, honestly, so many politicians get elected as representatives for a given space on certain promises, but then there's no accountability to uphold those promises. And, you know, if you don't follow through with them, there's nothing you can do. Technically, in the States, there's a recall process. In Canada, there really isn't a recall.
Do you think your brother will get reelected?
I don't think he wants to, but
You don't think he wants to get reelected?
I mean, personally, I don't know. I just think some of the latest stuff, and it's just really sad. Like, you know, that's not a way to live. You know, when I'm out here fighting for freedom and, like, you know, speaking for freedom and liberty, well, Justin is not a free man. Like, you know, he has, you know, they just showed him trying to go to an event, I don't know, a couple of days ago, and there were probably like 50 cops, like, you know, as his escort, because Canadians are pissed off. It's angry out there, folks. It's not a good look. You can't drive a car. Like, he can't go to a restaurant. Like, you make a big sacrifice when you enter into that public arena. And, you know, and he has entered that public arena. In the beginning, it was all kind of sunshine and rainbows, but now it's dark and there's a lot of negative energy. And to all the people that really are putting that negative energy on Justin, just recognize, like, you know, Justin's like the captain of the hockey team. He's not the manager of it. He's not the owner of it.
Who do you think the owner is?
Who do you think the owner is?
I don't know.
You have a pretty good idea.
I personally think there's a spiritual component to all of this. So there's maybe the supreme leader of it, but I assume business interests are
business interest. Yeah, I use the word the corporatocracy.
Yeah,
like, you know, their profits, you know, come from, like, you know, look at the pharmaceutical industry, like, and the profits reaped out of, you know, the COVID scenario. You know, it's just one example. Or the military industrial complex and the money and the profits reaped out of war. And, you know, you can.
But Canada's gotten so much poorer. I didn't go for a few years because of COVID, and we were just there this winter. And it's a poorer country. It's just much more expensive, and people's standard of living is dropping. I think that's fair to say, right? So well, it's also true in the United States. How could leaders, when their own country's getting poorer, send all this money to a war across the world that has no benefit to them at all?
That's a great question for them.
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing this? What are you doing for Canadians? Well, we're gonna create a new food program, or we're gonna create some more programs. But look at root spending, folks, and, like, look at the taxation situation. Like, you're taxed and you're getting taxed on the money that you're being taxed on. Like, you know, what you have left is very little. And then you look at the cost of housing, the cost of living, it's unsustainable. And then there's also, like, you know, a culture. I saw an article, you know, it's kind of like explaining, like, wow, there's, like, you know, over 100,000 people in the government making more than $100,000 a year. And it's like, well, I mean, when you factor in inflation, like, $100,000 is not what it used to be. Like, you're basically, if you've got a family, like, you're not thriving at $100,000 a year. Like, and same in America. And they want to, and, you know, I spent a lot of time working in the financial industry too. It used to be like, you know, remember the $10,000? You have more than $10,000 in cash? Well, it's been that way for like 50 years, $10,000 in cash. And now they're trying to bring it down to even lower numbers. Like, anytime there's a transaction over $600, they want to know, which is really dangerous. So, you know, when you have this financial oversight combined with the fact that people don't have any money, and then, you know, then there's also this element, there's like a UBI kind of gentle play that was kind of introduced as well with, you know, the checks were written in Canada for like $4,000 for every Canadian. Just,
yeah, that's UBI.
that's UBI, and it's just blanket given out. It's not like there was like a request. When people like who are like desperately needing help have a way to ask for help. No, it's just like blanket welfare. Really ineffective system, and ultimately it is going to drive more inflation, which will drive higher costs for everybody.
Well, it's quite effective that way.
Yeah.
If you want to make people totally dependent on the people in power, that's what you do.
Right.
So you said you think your brother wants to get out. My final question, what do you think he will do when he gets out? And what do you think he should do when he gets out?
I mean, if you think about like what did like Bill Clinton do when he got out, it's like I'm going to go on speaking tour and like, go sit on boards and do things like that. And you could probably do that. I think there's he's got to ultimately decide what he's going to do. I would say start with Ho'oponopono. Like that's a good place to start. Like
with the Hawaiian prayer.
With the Hawaiian prayer.
Say you're sorry.
Say you're sorry. Apologize. Ask for forgiveness. But tell people why you're sorry too. Come clean. Like, there's stuff. I'm sure there's some stuff. Like, just repent, if you will, and move forward in a good path. Do the best you can, because this is this life that we have to live, and let's respect our children, our grandchildren, our parents, our elders, our ancestors. Carry the flame.
Amen. Kyle, thank you.
Tucker, thank you.
Free speech is bigger than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will not permit. What we're watching is the total inversion of virtue.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. The internet is crowded with interesting things that don't really matter. On TCN, we attempt to bring you interesting things that actually do matter, and a lot of them. Interviews, long form and short, videos, documentaries. You can find all of it on tuckercarlson.com, and we hope you will.